Two men, a fortified villa, and the most powerful military machine on Earth. Surrounding it. They had 24 hours to surrender. They didn't even bother to respond. What happened next? In the summer heat of Mosul, on a quiet residential street, would shock the entire world. Not because two dangerous men died, but because of how they died, and what they did in those final brutal hours before the end came for them. This is not a story about victory. This is a story about what happens when power, absolute, inherited, terrifying power, finally runs out of road. For decades, the names Uday and Qusay Hussein were spoken in whispers across Iraq, not out of respect, out of fear. Uday, the older son, was unpredictable in a way that even his father Saddam found difficult to manage. There are documented accounts of him shooting guests at dinner parties, kidnapping women off the street in broad daylight, running personal torture chambers. He once beat one of his father's closest aides to death with a cane at a public event, and people still showed up to his parties because refusing the invitation was worse. Qusay was different, quieter, more calculated. He commanded the Republican Guard, Saddam's most elite military force. He was the heir apparent, the one Saddam actually trusted to run things when the time came. Less charismatic than his brother, far more dangerous. Together, they were the two most wanted men in Iraq after Saddam himself. After the fall of Baghdad in April 2003, they vanished. And for months, nothing. The US military had them on the deck of cards. Uday was the ace of hearts, Qusay, the ace of clubs. Coalition forces were hunting them across the entire country. Tips came in daily, most of them dead ends, some of them deliberate traps. Then, on the morning of July 22, 2003, a single informant walked into a US military outpost in Mosul. And everything changed. Before we go any further, if you're new here, welcome to X History. We don't do surface-level history. We go inside the room. We find the moments that textbooks skip. If that sounds like your kind of channel, subscribe right now and hit the bell. Every single video is built for people who actually want to understand history, not just hear it. Now back to Mosul, because what that informant said, and what the US military did next, is where this story gets complicated. The tip was specific, dangerously specific. Uday and Qusay Hussein were hiding inside a villa on Falah Street, a residential neighborhood in Mosul's northern district. They were not alone. There was at least one bodyguard, possibly more, and one other person whose presence nobody expected. A teenage boy, Qusay's son, 14 years old. His name was Mustafa. He was in that house too. The US military had maybe hours before word got out that they knew. They had to move fast, but they also knew that moving fast against men like Uday and Qusay meant casualties. These weren't scared men hiding under a bed. These were men who had survived assassination attempts their entire lives, men who had grown up watching their father eliminate anyone who showed weakness. They were not going to go quietly. And the American commanders making the call that morning, they knew it. What they didn't know yet was just how long, how violent, and how extraordinary the next 4 hours were going to be. Major General David Petraeus, the man commanding the 101st Airborne Division in Mosul, didn't hesitate long. The intelligence was solid. The location was confirmed. And every hour they waited was another hour. Uday and Qusay could slip out through the city's back roads and disappear again. The order went out. Move in now. But here's where the military faced a problem that no amount of firepower could fully solve. The villa on Falah Street was not some empty warehouse on the edge of the desert. It was surrounded by civilian homes, families, children, the kind of neighborhood where an airstrike would cause a massacre, and the kind of neighborhood where two armed, trained, Desperate men could do enormous damage before going down. This had to be surgical, or at least as surgical as war ever gets. Shortly after 10 a.m. on July 22, 2003, a convoy of U.S. military vehicles quietly sealed off Falah Street. Soldiers from the 101st Airborne took positions around the building. Snipers found their angles. The perimeter went up fast. Within minutes, the entire block was locked down. Then came the loudspeakers. In Arabic, clear and firm, a message went out to anyone inside the villa: surrender, come out. This does not have to end in violence. Silence. They tried again. Still nothing. And then, a single burst of gunfire erupted from inside the villa. That was the answer. What followed was not a quick, clean operation. It was 4 hours of some of the most intense urban combat American forces had experienced since entering Iraq. Uday and Qusay, along with their bodyguard and young Mustafa, had turned that villa into a fortress. Reinforced positions, multiple weapons, enough ammunition to hold off a small army. They fired from windows, from rooftops, from stairwells. U.S. soldiers trying to breach the building were pushed back. Twice, 2 American soldiers were wounded in the initial assault. The military pulled back and called in heavier support. What came next surprised even veteran soldiers watching from the perimeter. Rocket-propelled grenades, heavy machine guns, and eventually OH-58 Kiowa helicopters firing missiles directly into the building. The villa shook. Parts of the upper floors collapsed. And still incredibly, return fire kept coming. Whoever was left inside that building was not surrendering. Not flinching. Not breaking. Here is the part that stays with historians. At some point during those 4 hours deep inside that crumbling, burning villa, Qusay Hussein made a choice. He could have pushed his teenage son Mustafa out of a window, told him to run. The Americans almost certainly would have held fire on a 14-year-old boy trying to escape. He didn't. Whether that was because Mustafa refused, whether Qusay believed they would somehow survive, whether it was pride or love or the same cold calculation that had defined his entire life, nobody knows. Mustafa died in that villa alongside his father, 14 years old. The youngest casualty of the Battle of Falah Street, a battle that had no real name until it was over, and no real winner that felt good about the outcome. By early afternoon, the gunfire stopped, not gradually, all at once, the way battles sometimes end. One moment the air is tearing apart with noise, and the next, nothing. U.S. forces moved in carefully, weapon by weapon, room by room. They found 4 bodies inside the wreckage: the bodyguard, Mustafa, Qusay, and Uday, wounded multiple times, collapsed near what had been a reinforced interior wall, still holding a weapon. All 4 were dead, the most wanted brothers in the world, the men who had terrorized millions, who had lived like untouchable gods inside Saddam's Iraq, were gone. But the story wasn't over yet, because the U.S. military now faced a problem nobody had fully planned for. How do you prove to 25 million Iraqis, people who had watched Saddam's regime fake deaths, stage disappearances, and manufacture lies for 30 years, that Uday and Qusay Hussein were actually dead? The answer they came up with was controversial, deeply controversial. And it changed the rules of how modern warfare handles the question of proof. 4 bodies, 2 of the most feared names in modern history, but in Iraq, nobody believed it. Within hours of the U.S. military announcing that Uday and Qusay Hussein had been killed in Mosul, the streets were already buzzing with a different story. That it was a setup, that the bodies were doubles, paid decoys that Saddam's regime had used for decades to protect his family. That the real Uday and Qusay were already across the border, already in Syria, already laughing. This wasn't paranoia. This was a population trained by 30 years of Ba'athist propaganda to doubt everything the outside world told them. Saddam himself had used body doubles. It was documented. It was known. So when American officials stood in front of cameras and said, "We got them," millions of Iraqis simply didn't believe it. And that disbelief was dangerous. Because as long as people feared that Uday and Qusay were still out there, the resistance continued. The intimidation continued. People wouldn't cooperate with coalition forces, wouldn't come forward with intelligence, wouldn't risk their families on the word of an army claiming to have killed men who might still be alive. The US military needed proof. Real, undeniable, visual proof. What they decided to do next crossed a line that had never been crossed before in modern American military history. On July 24, 2003, 2 days after the battle, the US Department of Defense made an extraordinary decision. They released photographs of the bodies, not blurred, not obscured. Full images of Uday and Qusay Hussein, cleaned up, partially reconstructed by military morticians after the damage from the battle, and photographed for public release. The Pentagon justified it directly. The Geneva Convention's restrictions on displaying enemy dead applied to prisoners of war. Uday and Qusay, they argued, were not soldiers. They were combatants who had died resisting arrest. The rules, they said, were different. Human rights organizations pushed back immediately. The images were degrading. They set a precedent. They opened the door to future decisions where governments could display enemy dead as trophies, dressed up as evidence. The debate was fierce and legitimate on both sides. But here is what happened when those photographs hit Iraqi television screens. People gathered around sets in coffee shops, in homes, in markets, and they went quiet. Not celebratory, not horrified, just quiet. Because for millions of Iraqis, those images meant something words never could have delivered. It was over. That particular nightmare, the one with Uday's name on it, the one that had cost so many women, so many families, so many innocent people their dignity and their safety, that one was finished. The international media expected dancing in the streets. What they got was far more human than that. Yes, there were Iraqis who celebrated openly, who had personal reasons, devastating personal reasons to feel relief at the news. Families of people Uday had tortured, women who had survived encounters with him that they never spoke about publicly. Former Republican Guard officers who had lived in terror of Qusay's quiet, methodical punishments. For them, the photographs were closure, but there were others who felt something more complicated, who had grown up in a system where Uday and Qusay were simply part of the landscape of power. Terrifying, yes, but also strangely permanent. The idea that they were gone created a vacuum that felt unstable rather than safe. There were those, particularly in Sunni communities in the north, who saw 2 Iraqi men killed by a foreign army on Iraqi soil and felt something closer to grief than relief. Not for Uday and Qusay specifically, but for what their deaths represented about who now held the power in their country. History, as always, refused to be simple. Here's the uncomfortable truth that most coverage of this story skips. The deaths of Uday and Qusay Hussein did not end the Iraqi insurgency. Within weeks, attacks on coalition forces actually increased. The resistance, which had hoped that removing Saddam's sons would fracture the opposition, found instead that the power vacuum created new players, new factions, new grievances. Saddam himself was captured 5 months later. In December 2003, hiding in a hole in the ground near Tikrit, disheveled, exhausted, nothing like the untouchable figure he had projected for decades. He was executed in December 2006. And yet, Iraq did not stabilize. The sectarian violence that followed in the years after 2003 would claim more lives than the entire invasion itself. The death of 2 brutal men, did not fix a broken country. It never does. What it did do, and this matters, is remove two specific, documented sources of terror from the lives of real people. Whatever the geopolitical consequences, whatever the historical debate about the war itself, Uday Hussein never hurt another woman after July 22, 2003. Qusay's Republican Guard never dragged another family out of their home in the middle of the night. Sometimes history forces you to hold two truths at once. That villa on Falah Street in Mosul no longer exists. It was demolished. The neighborhood moved on the way neighborhoods do, quietly, slowly, brick by brick. But the questions that Firefight raised are still with us. About proof and dignity. About justice and vengeance. About what it means to end a reign of terror, and whether ending it is ever as clean as we need it to be. If this video made you think, not just watch, but actually think, then X History did its job today. Share this with someone who takes history seriously. Subscribe if you haven't already. And leave a comment below, because I genuinely want to know. Do you think releasing those photographs was the right call? The next video is already in production. And trust me, you are not ready for what's coming. Stay curious. I'll see you there.